Good evening, everybody. My name is Gordon Porter. I'm the Director of Inclusive Education Canada. We're going to start very shortly. We have quite a number of people that are joining us tonight, and they're gradually connecting now. It's just 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock in Eastern Time now. So we're not going to formally start for just a minute or two till we allow more people. It's kind of increasing as we speak, the number of people who are signed in. So be a little bit patient. And I'll talk for just a minute about Inclusive Education Canada generally while this happens. So Inclusive Education Canada is a program, it's an effort that's sponsored by the Canadian Association for Community Living, just recently renamed as Inclusion Canada. And you see that on your screen. Inclusion Canada is now the name that is used. A lot of the local associations across country are still called Associations for Community Living. A number of local and provincial associations have changed their name as well. So it varies from place to place, but the movement is towards using the term Inclusion Canada, Inclusion Ontario, Inclusion New Brunswick, and so on. Inclusive Education Canada focuses on giving information and supporting parents, families, teachers, school administrators, anyone who has a particular interest in learning about and sharing information about inclusive education. We have a number of people who work as what we call associates. We have a network of associates, of people who have particular expertise. Some of them are university academic associates. Others are practical people from the school systems across the country. And we also have people who spent a lot of time in the parent movement or in advocacy on working with parents to get their kids included in schools. So we try to do all of those things, and we do them in what we hope is a knowledge-based way. We're clear in what we advocate for. We believe that every child in Canada should be able to be supported to go to their local neighborhood school and be included with their peers. That's the goal, that's the target. And we have had a lot of success in the last number of years in achieving that. There are many inclusive schools in Canada. There are a number of inclusive school districts, and there are some provinces that have pretty systemic province-wide policy and practices that if they're not fully inclusive, they're moving there. They're trying to get there. And it's not an easy job. I guess I can tell you from my many years of experience is that making schools inclusive for every child is not easy work. It takes a lot of cooperation and effort by teachers, parents, and by taxpayers and school board administrators and the full society, actually. Now, if Inclusive Education Canada has a website, please check it out. And we also sponsor events like this seminar or webinar tonight. And we're going to be doing a number of additional ones in the new year, hopefully more on a frequent basis. And we hope that you'll tune in if you find the topic of interest. Now, we still have a number of people who indicated they're joining us who haven't, but we're going to begin in any event. So I'm going to now introduce the moderator for tonight's session, and then she will conduct the session from there and to introduce our parent panel members. So I want to introduce to you Jess Whitley, and Jess will wave her hand, or I guess you can see her name there on the screen. And she's a professor at the University of Ottawa, and her focus is on improving school experiences for students and teachers, in particular in inclusive education. And she's focused on mental health issues, inclusive education policy, preparation of teachers. She conducted research in her own community and across the country, and is involved in a number of efforts to develop more knowledge and to encourage practice towards inclusive education. We're really pleased to have her join our network of associates. She's someone that's just joined us in the last year or so, and we're really looking forward to her working with us in the future. And we're very pleased that she was willing to act as the moderator for this session tonight. So with that, I'll turn things over to Jess Whitley.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks for the invitation. Hopefully you'll hear as little from me as possible tonight and as much as we can from the parent experts that we have here with us. So Gordon had suggested that maybe I share a little bit about the research we've been doing with parents over the past few months to start. And then we're going to hear from the parents and hopefully have some conversation back and forth. And then we're going to leave a pretty good chunk of time towards the end for questions and hopefully engage in some dialogue with some of you that are here listening and watching as well. So in the spring, when schools were starting to close, I really was interested in learning more about and really capturing the experiences that I kept hearing personally from families who were supporting their kids at home. And I really wanted to capture that in kind of in a broader way, besides the anecdotes that I was hearing. So along with some colleagues at the Canadian Research Centre on Inclusive Education, we started reaching out to families across the country, and we created a survey, and we really were trying to tap into kind of the supports that parents were reporting receiving from the school with respect to learning, parent stress. We were interested in finding out some about that. We had a sense that there was, parents were experiencing a fairly high level of stress from what we were hearing. Parent efficacy in terms of supporting their kids learning at home. And so we had a range of items there. And then we had these beautiful, long, winding interviews that we continue to do now, even as schools have reopened, where we heard from families about what their daily life was like, what their experiences were like, what they were noticing, some silver linings that many of them pointed out that were somewhat unexpected to us. So that's been really just a privilege for me and for my colleagues to engage in this work over these past few months. A couple of things that have stood out to me in that work. First of all, we spoke to, I think, 99% mothers. We had, I think, 2 dads who talked to us through interviews. And they just talked about just juggling an incredible number of roles at one time. So many of these families and mothers were working full time. They were supporting multiple children at home, challenges that we, many of us will appreciate around internet, around devices, around managing their own mental health and stress levels and not able to access the supports and the respite that they were used to receiving. That was a heavy weight for some families. I think that one of the surprising things to us was that although we asked a lot of questions about, learning and academics and schoolwork, what came out the most strongly in all of the findings is that families were more concerned about the social emotional impact that the closures were having on their children than they were about the academic. And there were lots of reasons for that. And some of them spoke to, for some of their children experienced grief and intense loss at just suddenly not having these strong adult relationships and peer relationships that they had had. And for some of their children, they only had peer relationships at school. They didn't exist outside, particularly if they weren't in inclusive settings. So they didn't have those neighborhood connections. And so when the schools shut down, some of their children lost all contact with peers and these adult relationships. And so that was a really significant concern for the families that we spoke to. I'm just going to end with a brief anecdote, and then I'm going to pass it over. So we were talking to families, and we were asking about their pandemic experience and how this played into their the inclusion of their child virtually and in different ways. And what I noticed over and over again is that families really wanted to tell the whole story. They wanted to start, they'd say, well, let's back up a bit. I want to talk about the journey of how we got to the spring of 2020, right? Which sometimes meant 17 years of journey. Sometimes it meant 2 years of journey. And so we got to kind of walk through this path with them. And many of them pointed to that kind of first interaction they had when they walked to their neighborhood school with their child, or the spring before they were supposed to register, and what that first interaction was like for them. And many of them had that come really strongly to mind. So I'm just going to pull out a quote from one mom who has a young daughter. So this was not too long ago. And she said, I continue to carry that hurt of having a principal of our homeschool basically say, your daughter, she's like, we know we have to take her, and the mom said she has a legal right to attend her home school. Mom said, but like, it was very clear that she was not welcome. And so other people suggested to her that she, try a different school board in her same catchment. And she said, I was really resistant. And, eventually we just went and we had a meeting, and it was great. The principal was lovely. He was like, of course, we'd love to have her. And he said, I believe in inclusion. And when I asked him, what do you mean by that? Is that just the line? And I've actually since found out that he has a niece with Down syndrome. So his views of inclusion aligned with mine. And it wasn't a perfect first few conversations, and we still had a lot of questions. But just having that first conversation with someone who said, of course, she's welcome here. She's great. Like, okay, that to me felt like a much better starting point. So I thought we could start. There. And so what we're going to do now is we're just going to start going around to each parent and just ask them to introduce themselves briefly, and their child as well, and let us know a little bit about why inclusive education is a priority for them. And I've forced an alphabetical order here on people. So some of you lucked out by that, some of you didn't. So Andrea, would you mind starting us off with that?
Sure. Hi, my name's Andrea Cameron, and I'm parent to a 14-year-old boy, just started grade 9 in September. And so grade 9 looks very different, as you can imagine, than we expected. I'm also a high school drama and English teacher, and my husband is math and science. And so our unique situation is that we would have been teaching in the same school as our son this past September. So a lot of our colleagues would be his teachers. So it's kind of an interesting situation. But inclusion's extremely important to us because our son, we've always found he just does better when he's with same age peers in a busy classroom. He has strong connections with the adults in his life, but he also gets attached to the peers around him. And those relationships over the years have been extremely important. And so we nurture that. And all along, we've just been very clear about our goals for him to be fully included in his classroom life. He has epilepsy, so he has seizures every day. And it's really important to us that everyone around him becomes comfortable with that. And so the best way is for him to be with other people, and it's the safest place for him to be is when everyone is familiar with him. So that's another motivation for us for his inclusion.
Thanks, Andrea. April, would you mind introducing yourself and your family?
Sorry, just had to get the mute off there. My name's April, and we have 3 children, and our middle son, his name is Josiah, and he has Down syndrome, and he is 10 and a half. So for us, inclusion has always been a priority because I look ahead to the future, and I do have a lot of anxiety around, what's going to happen to him when I'm old and gray and not able to take care of him, or just, when life circumstances change. And so for us, we just really have always wanted him to be included so that he has those social support networks, so that as he gets older, he has people, to do things with, people to support him, people to help him out with. So that's been our priority for him. I mean, it's helpful that I have a child on either side of him. He's the middle, so he ends up kind of vicariously getting included in, play dates and things like that with other peers and with the neighborhood kids, so that, that's kind of happened naturally on its own. And it's also, I think it's a really important skill for the rest of the world needs to learn how to work with people who are different, right? And problem solve with people who are different and think differently than him. So yeah, I guess that's kind of where we're coming from. Mhm.
Great, thanks, April. Kim, you're up next.
Thought I unmuted myself there. Sorry about that. I'm Kim Southern Paulson. I'm in Toronto, and I'm a mother to two sons that are in their 20s. And so this evening I'm here because of my 22-year-old. He'll soon be 23. He left school when he was 19, and the majority of his schooling was in his neighborhood school. He started out in a special kindergarten, which kind of went awry. But we discovered when we brought him back to our neighborhood school that there was a whole world waiting for him, and all the connections around him and the learning that took place by being with the kids in the neighborhood. So now that he's out of school, the reason why inclusion is important to us still is because for all of you who have children in the system, whether you have a disability or not, for kids to be educated together, it creates such a strong foundation for everyone, right? There's not going to be that fear. There's not going to be those perceptions of, why are you here? You need to be over there. These people are going to be his future neighbors or coworkers or storekeepers or whatever. So we really need a world that is ready to embrace him through the ages.
Thanks, Kim. Sandeep.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sandeep Gill. I would say we are immigrants to this country, came here in 2014. My son, I would say I have two sons, but for the elder one, 14 years old, he is autistic, who's been diagnosed when we came to the country. Before that, he was going to a regular mainstream school back home. And to be honest, it might seem like I am maybe hiding something or stuff like that, but we never noticed that there was something which was that big a difference from the regular or neurotypical kids. Coming here as, I would say, April was just mentioning about this thing that, like, you, even Jess was mentioning about the story about a kid, like, I was told that there is something which is not right, and he is not welcome in the mainstream school. If he's coming to school, there has to be some of the things, and that was very hard initially when you don't have information, when you don't know about what exactly the rules and regulations, and you're still trying to focus. Being in this country, I'm very, very high on inclusion because I have seen what my kid was doing while he was back home in a mainstream school, and he kind of like stopped. It was like stagnation point for him when we put him into a segregated class, which was again, when it's been introduced to you, it seems like the best possible thing, but it wasn't. So yeah, I am kind of, to be honest, like listening to people and when meeting others, so very high and very supportive of our kids going to school with all the other kids, and other kids need to know that it's okay. It's okay to be different. It's not a big issue. It's not a big deal. And we all are here together so that one can hold the hand of other one and, move forward. So yeah.
Thanks, Sandeep. So I think it's pretty neat that we have people at all different points along their journey and different ages, and so we've got a lot to learn from from the varied experiences. So I'll toss another question out there, and then hopefully I'm sure some of it will resonate and you're can build off what one another is saying. I thought it might be helpful to bring an example to mind for any of you where you felt like inclusion was going really well, where you would say, and I always, when I talk to parents, they'll say like, oh, I remember that fall of 2017, like things were really coming together there. And so I wonder if an example is coming to mind, or a time for some of you, and if you had a sense of what was happening to really make that the case, like what was coming together at that time, so that we can learn from some of those. I can go around, or if somebody has something ready, you're welcome to go ahead and get started, and we can build off that. Does anybody have anything that's popping to mind for them that they want to share?
Yeah, I would say actually for our son, he initially started in a preschool program they had this one classroom in the preschool that was half the kids. There was 8 kids in the class. 4 of the kids were typically functioning kids, and 4 of the kids had various special needs. So that's where it started, because the idea was to teach the typically functioning kids, right, how to get along with and work with, kids who had more difficulties. So it was sort of like, the idea was really to kind of prepare them for being in, mainstream school. And then he started in our main public school, and JK, SK, grade 1, grade 2 were good. They went really well. And the shift happened when we had a principal change. So JK, SK, and grade 1, we had the same principal. And she was definitely someone who was an advocate. Like, she would say, April, don't worry about it. When I need extra support, I just ask the board for it, and I usually get what I want. So right from the beginning, she was very much like, we'll take care of him. Like, it was a really positive thing. And especially his grade 2 teacher was amazing. Like, she was like passionate about working with him, and she would come up with different kinds of activities to help him to learn. And it's funny because my older son had her for kindergarten, and I actually wasn't that big on her for him. Like, I just found like she was like, okay, but she was in her element with Josiah. So things were good. And then after grade 1, we had a principal shift, but grade 2 was still good because we had a new principal and a new vice principal. And the vice principal was awesome. She had actually started her career as an EA, and then, had worked her way up to, vice principal level. So she really got it. Like, I had very good conversations with her. And then we lost her at the beginning of grade 3 because she went on to become a principal somewhere else. And that's where things really, really digressed. And the principal, it was obvious, he's definitely a bureaucrat. He's probably going for a promotion higher up in the board, is kind of what I guess. He's very much a rule follower and a bureaucrat. So he's not one that's going to push at the board level for extra resources. And it was really obvious that he just could not manage him and didn't want to ask for the resources to make that happen. There just wasn't this, I don't know if it was that the teacher wasn't getting the support and the AAs weren't getting the support, or if they just didn't have the skills. But he had the same EA that he had the previous year, and things had been fine the previous year. But in grade 3, it really was terrible. And the only difference I can see is that we had a new principal in grade 2, and then in grade 3 we lost the vice principal, who was also who was very much got it, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So the leadership, the culture, the advocacy, the get itness, they got it. Yeah. Okay. So I'm hearing some some pieces there. Thanks, April. Would anybody like to build on what April was saying, or have something that they want to share on that? Kim, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So it's not a particular year, but certainly from grade 5 to grade 8 was phenomenal for my son. I think, there's a number of things that were happening. Like, he was full-time in the regular class. There was no pullout. We had kind of put our foot down about that. He wasn't going to go out to resource room anymore. He was to stay in that regular classroom. We had, like April mentioned, we had a new principal come in. The only difference is the new principal was, the old principal, there wasn't an issue, but the new principal was just very open. And there was never, the answer was never no. It was, let's think about that. Or maybe we can't do it quite like that, but let's try to figure this out. So there was always this, I don't want to say problem solving. It was just this opportunity to communicate and to be creative and try to think things through. The planets aligned, I guess. Like, he had a good teacher. He'd never had support per se. And there was a young man that was came into our school and was a support that was shared amongst the whole school. They called him Superman. He would come swooping in for all the guys that were forever, acting up or getting in trouble or whatever. And there was a lovely relationship that formed between him and my son, and they're still in touch. We saw growth. David's literacy improved. His, he was more confident. He would go through the neighborhood. People, like, even more people kind of knew him and could converse. His language developed, and there were friendships that were really forming. And so there were a couple of cool things that happened during that time. There's like an overnight trip that the grade 6s always do. They're gone for 3 nights. He'd never been away from us. And the school worked to make sure it worked. And so they were off in Algonquin Park, and he was doing a great job, having a blast with everybody else. The grade 8 trip, same thing, went away. It was planned. We didn't have to say anything. They just figured it out. And in grade 8, like, our school would always do like a science fair. And it was well known. My son required, quite a number of accommodations and adaptations and so forth. And he was able to do a project based on something that he loved, which happened to be light bulbs. Fluorescent light bulbs, to be exact. And he was one of the final, I think it was 3 final contestants that went off to represent our school in the city science fair hosted by U of T. So all of those things were just amazing. Like, it was just those opportunities that he wouldn't have gotten, right? And I think the reason behind it, part of it is definitely the school, the principal, the teacher, like all these people behind the scenes, but it also was years of using really positive language. It was always, he wasn't the kid with whatever label, it was, he's David. And so years and years of saying that, people began to believe that. When he was in grade 2, we learned that having a vision was a really important tool. And we would use that at every opportunity in every school meeting. And we would go further, like any school meeting that we would have, we'd say, we're aiming for real life, a real job with real pay and real home. That's where we're headed. And the resistance that we used to have loosened, because there were all these people that began to really believe what we were doing. And I guess the other part that I forgot to mention was just all the kids, all the friendships that were forming. So it's all those relationships.
Thanks so much, Kim. Andrea or Sandeep, did you want to jump in with one of your examples?
Sure.
Go ahead, Andrea, please. Sorry.
All right. Sorry about that. Yes. So I was thinking, I've got a couple stories in mind, but the one that's standing out is a recent one, because with the challenge of the pandemic and again, as you said, many parents are grieving the loss of their child's social life. So I was supposed to teach my son grade 9 drama and his peers. So I'd obviously been really looking forward to that, and it didn't work out. So because he couldn't take drama virtually, he had to be placed in grade 10 business. That was the alternative. So we were a little worried how that would go. And it ended up being a really positive experience. He only knew one other student in the class. And so we thought, oh gosh, so now he's also missing a chance to build relationships. But we also took advantage of this time. Kim was talking about vision. And so our vision has been for Kieran to, same thing, have his job, his home, all of those things. And we make that clear all the way along so that the school team, we're very honest with them about our vision for Kieran. And whether they agree with it or not doesn't matter, because that's our vision and we share it. We invite them to join us, right? Some people do and some don't. But his business teacher has joined us in that vision. And so he was struggling because of his vision with some of the spreadsheet assignments, things like that. It was really challenging. So we'd started this business with him this year. We took advantage of that, and he draws monsters. So he's making these monster t-shirts and selling them. And so she gave him the opportunity to present his business to the class and how he designs his shirts and how he gets them produced and all of those things. So he used a PowerPoint and talked to the class. And then it was really awesome because he's younger than they are. He's in grade 9, they're all in grade 10. And they were so excited about what he's doing that he was just getting fired with questions and answering all these questions. And then they all started liking his social media page. And so those aren't the same friendships he would get if he was in class. But what we're really happy with is even in this difficult situation, he was able to virtually connect with a class. When he returns to school, he doesn't really know them. It's very hard. There's only 8 of them at home and the rest are in the classroom. But when he goes back to school, they know who he is. They've got a place to talk to him about something. He has something to share. So in a really difficult time, we're still trying to creatively find ways for him to be included. And in the end, what we thought was going to be a real challenge, it wasn't without challenge because it was a challenging subject for him, but he ended up having this really neat experience and learned a lot and was able to share his talent with the class. So that was a positive thing we had lately.
That's great. And I have heard other examples of how some of the ways that students are accessing schooling right now, and different virtual options that we thought would go so terribly wrong, actually for some students are offering them possibilities that they might not otherwise have had. So hopefully we can learn from those going forward as well. Sandeep, did you have something that you wanted to share?
Yes. Probably, I think I would be the only one who had a negative experience in last couple of years, because my son, as I was mentioning, was going to mainstream school back home, and he was like a cream of the class, and he was always like in a very bright child. But since coming here, and then like this diagnosis, as Kim was mentioning, that people knew his kid as David, not a label on his, not a label mentioning like what kind of child he is. And that was exactly the experience we have been through in the last 5 years, that he has autism and he has these behaviors. And those are the things which are actually describing him instead of his strengths, which is like he is an amazing visual learner. You can just tell him one thing and he will never forget. This past 5 years of our life were really hard. Again, initially we weren't aware of, we didn't have support system who can, tell you that, okay, it's your right. You can say no to segregated classrooms, right? So basically inclusion, according to us, was not a choice. It was like not there. And that was very hard on our family, because the thing which is projected is like that, this segregated classroom where they're going to take your kid out of the class and he's going to in this room for the whole day. They are not going out. They don't integrate. There is nothing where they are seeing how other kids are developing. There is like, it was a really challenging situation until you know that there are other things available. And it's with pain when I say this thing, that we are an educated family. Me, my husband, we both have like our education, which is pretty good. I would say we both have our masters, and still, because of lack of information, which might some people who are there might be experiencing, that they don't know what to do and where to go and how to look at those challenges. The positive which happened, and again, as 2020 being pandemic is being considered as the bad and the worst year so far, the positive thing was that the teacher which my son got since 2019 November, before that it was a mess. We were told that they won't be able to allow him in school full time. They are gonna like shorten his day and stuff like that. But this teacher, who herself has a disability, she started taking online classes for my child. She was doing it like twice a week. And the most amazing thing which I have seen is that my kid like got back his confidence. You know, he's a kind of person who's, when you challenge him, he take that challenge heads on, and then he's like totally engaged in you. And she was so amazed to see this thing, that he's the same kid who was being called trouble at school, and that too in a segregated classroom. So now again, he is, when he went back to school in September, it's not a mainstream school. We are still working towards sending him to a mainstream school. He's in a life skills school. But the principal is amazing. And I got a chance to visit him in the class. And then I saw, oh my God, the kind of work they are doing. And in just less than 2 months, they actually figured it out, that what his strengths are. They are not focusing on his weaknesses anymore. Like, it's not like behavior, like, oh, he's not hitting, oh, he's hitting, oh, he's doing this and that. It's more about like what he is good at. And I'm so surprised that that confidence, that ray of confidence, when a teacher shows in you, how big a change that makes in your child. Like, he is happy, he's giggling, he's back to his own self. So yeah. Until now, I was just have this mindset that maybe it's for his betterment that he is in this segregated classroom. Now I can tell you with 100%, or I would say more than 100% confidence, that our kids will actually bloom and flourish if they are with the mainstream kids, where they will learn by seeing what other kids are doing, right? Like they can resonate with what's going on in an environment, and that actually helps them brighten their own skills. So yeah, that's from me. Back to you, Jess.
Thanks, Sandeep. You mentioned knowledge and gaining knowledge, and we only know what we didn't know when we know it, right? I wonder if any of you had examples of like a support or a resource, or, you know, Kim and Andrea, you spoke so beautifully about the vision. This is our vision. We have this vision. We are moving ahead with it. We are sharing it. We have it clear in our minds. Are there other kind of supports or resources or strategies that you would point to? And Kim, you're able to really look back now too, to say those were really key, that we can kind of share with some of the other parents.
We did a person-centered review with Kieran and his, so we had, I think there must have been 15 people there. So was when he was in grade 6, so before he transitioned into the next school for grade 7. So the vice principal, his current teacher, his new CERT was there. And then we got the best thing is we got I believe it was 3 peers. Yeah, 3 of his friends came. And so they were able to share their observations of Kieran and what supports work best for him. And the kids kind of stole the show. It was like a lot of the things they contributed. Like they mentioned something that none of us really knew, that he was often delayed getting out for recess, getting ready, and so by the time he got out, he couldn't find anybody, and they would notice that then he'd come out after everything had started. So these little things that the kids notice that adults don't maybe notice, it was really helpful. So that was where we learned that his friends' voices are really important, what they see, and just having that person-centered review, that we got to really clearly share our vision. Up until then, we had a lot of challenges around that. sometimes lower expectations than we would have, right, coming up and things like that. So it was our chance to really share that we have this great big vision. We made a board with Kieran. We just wrote down all the things, like everything that he would like in his life and that we want for him, and things that he wants for himself, right? So things I want for him when he's 11 are different than what he wanted for himself. So, he wants 4 dogs or whatever. So I want him to have a house, right? So we're sort of seeing different things, but it was a really great exercise. And we still say that was pivotal in moving forward, doing that with his new teachers going into grade 7. It even helped his current school for the rest of the time he was there, but going into the new school with that tone set that, we've got all these people who have joined into this vision, sort of pushing him forward into his new environment was really great. So yeah, that was the best thing we did.
I love that, Andrea. And so whose suggestion was the person-centered review at the time? Do you remember?
Well, we've been very involved with Brockville community involvement, Brockville Association, BDACI. And so I think I heard about it through there initially. And then we talked to Erin Sheldon from Kingston, and she does this sort of thing. So she kind of helped us put it all together. And, you could do it on a much smaller scale too, but it was just really effective. I think the key thing was to have the kids there. That's the thing, no matter who else is there and what other adults are there, the kid voice was really great. And it was something we realized we had been neglecting, was the hearing from his friends, and it was important.
Yeah, they see so much that we don't notice or really understand, that the whole world that's happening there that we don't see. Kim, it looked like you had something that you were ready to share.
I'm really not so sure what I'm ready to share. I don't know if there's anything in particular that stands out. It's a whole bunch of little things that have happened over time. And I'll owe some of that to the organization that I work with, because I've had access to a lot of presenters and people that really are pro inclusion and real community life, that sort of thing. So I think with me, it was changing. I began to really believe what I was saying. Like, there was things that I wanted, but I wasn't really sure that we could have that. Do you know what I mean? Like I didn't even know, like in the beginning, what we wanted for David to be in his neighborhood school. I didn't even know there was a name for that. Like, there's this inclusive education thing. Wow, like that was pretty impressive when I learned that. But it was just, the changing the way that I spoke about him, because as a parent, you kind of, you're bombarded with all this stuff about what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be focusing on what they can't do and all of this. So you have to kind of strip that away, unlearn that, and relearn the things that you naturally want for your kids. And treating him with respect and modeling that, and building allies within the school as well. I was really involved in our kids' school, and always there volunteering in between work, and then like really trying to bring inclusion into the school. So it wasn't just about David being included, it was about who else is missing in our school and who's not being celebrated. So we live in a really diverse area, so we had like these enormous cultural celebrations, and it was so we built our social network, they built theirs, but we all began to look out for one another. So it was really a community building thing. So I think that was really important. The other thing for me was always hearing other people's stories. Like, I needed to hear other people's stories. Like, what were they doing? What was happening? Can this really work? Because at that particular time, and I'm pretty sure it still is in our school board, they kind of make you believe that it doesn't happen here, it happens somewhere else. So I needed to know what could happen so that I could begin to imagine it for the next year or 2 years or whatever, and adjusting our thinking. So sometimes we were kind of bluffing it, and other times we kind of really knew what we were doing. But I would say definitely the use of the vision was probably the most, in my opinion, it was probably the most powerful thing that we ever took under our wings. And just ran with it every single year.
Yeah, it sounds like that was a powerful piece. And I like Andrea's, like the actual vision board, so that everybody can see the vision and that consistent message of the high expectations and bringing the strengths forward and having people recognize the fullness of the individual instead of the diagnosis that comes forward or the identification at the top of the page. So that's clearly coming through. April, did you want to jump in on that conversation? Did you have something you wanted to add? You don't have to, but you're welcome.
No, I mean, I was just thinking that, yeah, I mean, I've always said to his teachers and to other people, you know, he's going to get a job, you know, like he's not going to spend his days just doing recreational activities, you know, for people who have disabilities. Like he's going to be a contributing member of society. Like he's going to do stuff. He's capable of doing stuff. I mean, unfortunately, I do find that the principal that we've had at the school actually looked at me and said, well, he's not on that track now. You know, was really, really ignorant and discouraging about it. But that's because he's wasn't being supported in that environment. Like he's very smart, he's very bright, he's very capable. And so, you know, he's going to do those things. And I think we just have to always keep that in our head. Because, you know, when I first had him, I was so full of grief, you know, thinking everything's over. But then when you kind of start to come out of that, you go, no, like he can accomplish a lot. And I started looking around me, and, you know, my dad used to work at a large organization called Bethesda. He was a program coordinator for there, and they work with all people with disabilities. And I was like, he's like, look at all these people I've worked with, you know, and all the things that they're doing now. And, you know, so yeah, you do have to come back to that vision, I think, to keep yourself focused, especially as a parent, right? Like, yeah.
We have a question that's been posted, and definitely others who are watching or listening, feel free to add a question to the list, and we'll pepper them at our panelists and see if they have some thoughts to share. So the first question is from Lisa, and I think we've spoken a little bit to this. So she says, what can you tell us in terms of concrete tips? So what was one thing you did or learned about including a mainstream school that you would say you wish you knew at the time? So I think some of what you've just described speaks to that. Is there anything kind of really specific or concrete that any of you would like to add to kind of looking back that you think, oh, that one thing would have been helpful to know at the time? Sandeep, you're nodding furiously. You must have something.
One thing, I really want to go back in time if I can fix and if I can go that. So to Lisa, I just want to tell you this thing, that you have all the rights. You have to ask, and you have to seek support in terms of, like, if I'll say my biggest support system at this point is BCCL, Anne Smith, and she is like working so hard with my family as a whole, just to seek that what options are available. Because funny enough, I was told by someone, I'm not going to name that person in the board office, that she's got this magic wand and she's going to give us this placement in this life skills schools, which anyhow my son was going. And I was heartbroken that why that. But at that point of time, you just feel in a way that you do not have any choice, and there is nothing available, there is no option. And that is only because of lack of information which is being provided to the parents. We are only given what they want to share, and we are not given, like, you know, A to Z of that kind of programs which is available within all these school boards and stuff like that. So yes, please ask for that. You have every right to deny segregated classroom, which I found out just now after 5 years. I wish I knew that part like 5 years ago, and I would have not let him go into that route in the first place. So do ask.
Thanks, Sandeep. Does anybody else have anything kind of specific or concrete that they could speak to? Kim, you're nodding, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I from what I see with other families, and certainly within myself, is just being really clear on what it is that you want. Like, instead of waiting for the school to tell you what you can do. So if you have that clarity, I guess it comes back to the vision, but really, you know, if you want them in that regular class and you want them participating in all aspects of school life, that's, you know, it's important to state that. And I know a lot of people, like, that notion almost gets held as ransom, if you will, because there'll be this, schools will say, but we can't get support, right? So, you know, there's lots of ways to get support. There's lots of ways to be supported. You don't necessarily need a person Velcro to your side. There's 20 kids in that classroom that have the ability to get to know you and nudge you when you're off track, or know if you're feeling sad and speak for you. And, you know, I just think that there's all kinds of ways to figure out how to support a kid in a class without necessarily having an adult Velcro to your side. So I just think that there's tactics that schools and school boards use to try to persuade parents to do something different. So yeah, like, just think big, get really clear, and don't let them tell you that, you know, you can't get support, because that's just not true either.
I have another question that's really interesting around the idea of student support services. So the example is speech language pathology, occupational therapy. So the question is about how those maybe were a part, or maybe they weren't, of your child's experience in school. Were there ways that these types of services were delivered that were helpful or not in supporting inclusion, and how did that kind of work? Does anybody have an example of something where speech or OT was part of the school experience of your child, and how that worked in?
I have an example about OT.
Yeah, go.
Okay.
Sure.
The disadvantage about the way, I don't know if every school board does it this way, but the OTs are changing so often. So they've all been fantastic people and really caring and had these great ideas, but we might see one for 3 visits and then a different one for 5 visits. And so it's really hard to build the continuity. But the one thing that I looking back, the advantage is they are the ones who can get the equipment your child needs. So you do need that relationship with the OT. And we discouraged Kieran from being taken out of the class. And I'm going to sort of second what Kim said about being really clear what you want. We were not clear enough at the beginning with our son that we didn't want him taken out for things, right? So he's on the ketogenic diet for epilepsy. So he would have to leave to eat his meals, because it was like complicated and messy. And so he would leave to eat his meals. And then we'd start to find out he was out for a lot longer than we were thinking, right? So things like that. So you have to be really clear also what you don't want to have happen. But that was a little second I wanted to give. But we had also said sort of the same with the OTs, like to minimize the time that they're taking him out. Like if they need to take him out to see if a piece of equipment fits or something, that's fine. But we didn't want him being taken out to have therapy services at school. So we wanted to minimize that, because especially with so much transience with the therapists, it wasn't going to be that effective because a relationship couldn't be built. So the one thing we started to think about is, so for his communication or his academics, you know, how can the OT support him? And we've started to have a lot more success with that. So, you know, for instance, right now we're getting help with voice to text technology would be an example. So we realized the importance of that relationship. And, you know, if we could go back, a little thing we would do is be a little more clear about him not getting taken out for therapy, but to use that therapist to get the equipment he needs to be in the classroom included.
We have a lot of questions. Kim, did you want to weigh in on that? And I can scan to the next.
No, just I would agree with Andrea. The most helpful professional service that came to us was an OT, and it was to get technology. But beyond that, we didn't really get to profit very much from any other professional services.
Yeah, and some of the work I'm doing now is I'm hearing from really creative approaches that school boards are using to bring SLPs, school psychs, OTs into the classrooms to support teachers versus pulling out and working with individual kids to try to build that kind of tier 1 level. It's a big switch in some areas for sure, but I've heard some really creative work around that. So here's another question. You all mentioned difficulty with principals. That was the same for us. We had several parking lot meetings with resource staff and aides who helped guide us on what we are entitled to, but what leadership maybe did not seem to want to bring in, like speech and therapy, ABA, etc. So she says, never stop advocating, learn the complaint examination procedure. So it does sound like there's a lot of know-how that parents are referencing or hearing about or referring back to. And it seems like that would be really challenging for a parent new to the system, new to the country, new to the world of bringing a child who's maybe not seen the same way as the rest into a school system, and to somehow have all of this knowledge and know-how. And that seems like a pretty extraordinary skill set and know-how that a parent would be expected to have to be able to navigate in the way that you all are discussing. Anyway, so here's a question from Sonia. How is it that school boards are allowed to misinform parents when inclusion is the first placement they must try? Has anybody had discussions around that or have any thoughts on that from?
Hi there. Actually,
legal one, and then also, yeah.
It's actually kind of, they don't tell you this thing that, oh, that's not available. They just give you a really good hope about segregated programs, that they are better than inclusion, right? So that was our story. We were told this thing that it's better to have kid in that class. It will be more structured, and it will reduce their anxieties and things like that. So information which we didn't have was that we have a right to decline that, and that's what I was saying, that we have this vision that, okay, this is not working for him for first year, but we didn't know this thing, that we do have this right, that we can decline and we can put him back into the mainstream classroom, which wasn't available. And then about occupational therapists and SLT program, as just you were mentioning, that they are coming as a consultant. They don't even see kids. It's just like a kind of assessment which is done, and kids change on daily basis, to be honest. So that was not even that helpful for us, except one OT. But then you learn through the way, and then you just try to go back. And as you just mentioned, that being new to the country, you don't want to be in somebody's bad books, to be honest. You just don't. You're so worried about this thing that, oh, if you say this thing, your child might be cornered. He might not get a kind of support, because you are not there. You're not physically present. You're just believing on what's being told, right? So you just have to, I don't know, that's what we've been through as a family, that we were just trying to be nice, not complaining, again, trying to get as much information possible without knowing our rights. So that's what I was trying to say, knowing your rights within any board is really important. And now it's working, because now they know that I know, right? So that's what's changing. So yeah.
I don't think you're alone in the sense of not wanting to rock the boat, or the idea of being nice, not being difficult. I hear that a lot from families, right, who are navigating how to navigate persistently, clearly, while still maintaining relationships. But that discomfort with maybe not being perceived as nice and easy to get along with can be a really challenging role for lots of parents to play. We hear that a lot. I think this is, oh, sorry, Sandeep, go ahead.
No, wait, I was just saying that it's very difficult for you as a parent, specifically when you have another child, and they can see all that stress, all that anxiety which you bring, because you just know that there is a possibility and still you are unable to support, right? So that's very hard and challenging, and that's painful.
There's a question around, because we've talked a lot about in the classroom, out of the classroom, an interesting question around inclusion at all of those out of class times, the unstructured times, the recess, the lunchtime, the bus rides. have any of you had experiences where that's been part of your thinking, as how do we have our child be, included more fully or more authentically or more successfully in all of those kind of other times and spaces in schools that can be a little less visible? That's okay. If
It
it's
was
not,
many
go ahead,
years
Kim, if you
ago.
want to. I know you're
Yeah.
trying to harken back to recess there.
Long time ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess when David was like in grade 1, the school, I don't even remember exactly how we did it, but they had a number of kids from the older grades that sort of acted as mentors, or they would start games, like they would get games going on the playground. So David would be there, so he would know what the games were, and there'd be some instruction about that, but they'd invite other kids to be part of that. And so they had like, I don't know, 5 or 6 teams, like the kids would be rotating. And so that seemed to help a little bit. And then that sort of went away. But, by that point, I think he had started to make connections with kids. And, when he started liking basketball, for example, he had a ball, he'd take to school with him. And so he would kind of set up next to other kids. And I don't know exactly how we did it, but people were very open to him. We didn't have to worry about a bus ride. And lunchtime, we had it set up so that he could come home for lunch. And then when he was a bit older, we had it set up so he could come home for lunch without us being here. But he'd only be here for like 10 minutes. He'd be here long enough to eat, and then he would go back. And then he could join in, like there were kids that he joined in with, like so I probably wasn't very helpful. But.
No, but it sounds like, so there was some efforts from the school when it seemed, and I'm sure there were other students who they were thinking of with that mentorship plan. But maybe by virtue of the relationships he was already building in those classes, then he did have opportunities to engage with peers in an authentic way when he was on their yard. So that was just happening more naturally, that he was able to do that. I still see there's certainly lots of schools in my area where certain classes of students are only brought out at certain times. So there is no natural opportunity for interaction between classes. So it is, it just doesn't develop on its own, certainly. So the structure can be helpful for some of those. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that? Or I can, well, there's a question around bullying too, but it sounds like I'm not hearing from a lot of you that that's something that you've noticed, because we do hear that a lot from families, that even with some support and structure in the classes, that when the kids are unsupervised and unattended, that there's some challenges that are being faced on the playground.
I would say I haven't experienced that. I feel like our son is always, even though he can do things that are super annoying to the other kids, like his behaviors are really annoying. I feel like the kids, they might get annoyed with them, but they've never bullied him. Like they might get annoyed when he like wipes his nose on them. To be fair, I get annoyed too. But they've always liked him. When we see kids out and about, they, like he is known
what it is,
loved, even though I think, I don't know, I haven't really seen that, so I
that's
think
good. We will look for it if it's not happening. That's great.
I'm sure it does happen in places, but we just haven't experienced that.
There's a really lovely question here that might be nice to sort of move us towards a wrap up. Question about what you think your children would say inclusion means to them. Is this an idea that they talk about or voice a preference? And I wondered if we could kind of go around, and if anybody has had these conversations with their child or anything like that. I'd love to hear that. If you want to put your hand up or go ahead and speak. Well, maybe I can just go around. Kim, did you want to start us off, and we can hear from everybody on that point?
Yeah, I think David was not aware of what inclusion was until he was on the other end of, school is almost wrapping up. At which point he was like, I don't even think he realized that there's a special class or a special bus or any of that. So he was just doing what his brother did, what he saw everyone else doing in the neighborhood. And yeah, like I think he just sees it as a natural part of life.
Doesn't know the absence of inclusion, right? Andrea, did you want to share anything on that point?
Sure. I think again, like Kim, my son just expects it for himself. I think he would, he was asked if he wanted to participate. Our school does have a segregated program where he goes, and he was asked if he wanted to participate in a program they were doing. I don't know if he overheard them talking about it, but he heard about it before I did, sort of thing. And he was kind of bewildered by, so it's kind of interesting that he just sort of saw his place as in his class, right? It didn't occur to him he would go elsewhere. So that's sort of interesting to me, but also he has autism and he loves his friends, but sometimes he's just had enough. So we always joke that sometimes he excludes himself. So they'll be inviting him to go somewhere and he'll just say, no, I'm going to stay here. So that's something kind of entertaining we see with him is we work so hard to have him included, and then we'll set something else like a school dance. We'll make sure he has all the support in place to go, and then he'll refuse to go. So these are, but we have to respect it, right? He can refuse if he wants, even though I worked really hard to make it happen. So
yeah, at least he had the option, he had the choice. So that's about as good as we can do, right? Thanks, Andrea. April, did you want to add into that one?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can't say I've necessarily asked him specifically about that, but he wants to participate with other kids. And often, his way of trying to make that happen is by these annoying behaviors, right? Because he's looking for connection. So it is definitely, he's a very social child, and he really wants that, that connection. So I think, yeah, it's just something that he kind of does expect, and why shouldn't he expect it? The rest of us expect it, right?
Yep.
Y'all want to be included.
Yeah, thanks, April. Sandeep?
Again, it's a difficult one as he doesn't communicate that much, but again, because we have seen him around family at home, people coming in and go, and he enjoys that part, having people around. I know having peers is a totally different experience, and I can only talk from my experience in the past, which is like when he was back home, and he loves that part. I cannot comment on the part that if he understands about inclusion. Like the kids don't even know what I would say. It has to be in any other way other than being included like they should be, like any other child. But it's painful because you see him sitting and looking at the kids playing outside, and he's just like looking out of the window. That if, to be honest, never spoke to him about inclusion part, if he knows or not. But yes, from what we gather when we see him or when we see his behavior, is that yes, he would like to be a part of a class where there are other kids, where he can do stuff which normal other kids, neurotypical kids do.
Thanks, Sandeep. I think we've just got a couple of minutes left before Gordon comes back on to wrap, or maybe Gordon's already there. When we see his face, we know that the hour is marching on. Gordon, did you want to take over?
Oh, go ahead, wrap up. I'm just rejoining.
Okay, you're just there. So we do have a couple more questions. I don't know if it would be appropriate, Gordon, to kind of send those along after, or if there's a way that so we've got parents wondering about sort of legal options that they have available to them. Is there somewhere that they could be directed kind of for resources or connections or things like that?
Sure. They can, if they have particular questions, they can send them along to us. And I do want to say that this session is being recorded, and it'll be posted on our website. and we encourage people to keep in touch, and we try to respond to whatever questions that people have. If people have questions about legal rights, that's certainly something that we can provide access to people who can answer those questions. So I think our time is almost up. Do you want to make a few final comments, Jess?
And the last question that came up was just someone saying kudos to the parents. keep advocating the good advocating. I'm just thankful that all of you have agreed to share your voices. And Kim, you mentioned stories, and I know that for myself and for other parents, it's the peer support is so crucial in this journey, and hearing what others have done and what others have accomplished, or gives everybody else strength along the way. And so it's people like you sharing your stories that really help others who are maybe earlier in their journey, or who need that kind of support around them to move forward. So so thank you for that. I really appreciate it, and I bring all of this back into my own work in preparing teachers and into our own research, and hopefully spread the word a little bit more widely. So so thanks.
And thank you, Jess, for moderating the session. Great job. Appreciate your insights and contributions to the conversation, and getting the points that our panelists were able to bring to the discussion. Thank you very much. And thank you to each of our 4 panelists. It's been great to meet you, even if virtually. And again, keep in touch with Inclusive Education Canada. We're a place where people can share information and learn from each other. And the more participation we have, the more we can be of assistance to people who have the same kind of challenges that you faced at different times during your life, or your life working with your child. So thank you to everyone. And remember that the session will be on our website, and you can refer that to anybody who's interested who maybe wasn't able to participate tonight. I want to thank Charlotte Pike from Inclusion Canada, and Mark Mushler, who's done our technical support. And with that, thanks very much, and good night to all.